Good morning and welcome. My name is Candice Patton and I'm the Executive Director for Clean Technology at Alberta Innovates. Welcome back if you got to attend our first session, and welcome to all of those who are just joining us for the first time today. We're now in our second session of the Small Modular Reactors Learn How series. Alberta Innovates is the innovation engine for the province. When a new technology has the potential to benefit Alberta, our teams get excited to explore opportunities and challenges that those technologies may present. We love to share knowledge, open up connections, good conversation around energy and clean tech, so we hope this series is going to spark ideas for you. It's an opportunity for Albertans to discover new nuclear technology, to hear more about the SMR action plan, safety regulations, and what's happening in the innovation space all across Canada. We've got great content for you today. We're digging deeper into some of the great work that's going on around Canada, voices from New Brunswick, Ontario, and Saskatchewan, to talk about some of the exciting innovation happening around SMR in Canada, lessons learned so far, and how provinces and utilities are coordinating and collaborating to understand the opportunities in Canada around these technologies. If you missed our first session, SMR 101, we had NRCan, the Canadian Nuclear Association, and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. You can view it on demand with our Inventors Unbound platform. The third session will be next week, on March 2nd. It'll feature Ron Oberth from the Organization of Canadian Nuclear Industries to talk about potential industrial opportunities for Alberta, and a technology showcase featuring 9 different companies with different SMR technologies, so you can learn a little bit more about each one. Our fourth session will be the following week on March 9th, and it'll really get into community, Indigenous engagement, and conversations around energy transition. I've got a few housekeeping items for you before we get going. First off, we will be recording the webinar, and it will be available along with the presenter slides after the session. We want to hear from you during the session. Feel free to use the group chat to say hello. Let us know where you're joining from today. I'd love to hear what drew you to the session today and why you're excited about the series. During the presentations, if you have a question for our speakers, we'll have time at the end of all 6 presentations for a discussion. So use the Q&A button to submit a question. You can let me know who you're directing your question to, if there's someone in particular, or you can leave it open for the speakers to address. You can also use the Q&A if you need help with a technical question. Our comms team will be looking out for any issues. If we don't have time to get to your question today, we're capturing them all, and we'll be able to give our speakers an opportunity to answer them afterwards and post those as additional resources on our website. We'll send you an email after the event when that's ready to go. We also recommend that you log into this webinar with Google Chrome. So if you haven't already, switch to that. It makes things a lot easier. All right, let's dive into our first presentation, focusing on SMR development in New Brunswick. We have Brett Plummer from New Brunswick Power and Bill Breckenridge from the Government of New Brunswick. Bill is the Assistant Deputy Minister for Energy and Mining in the New Brunswick Department of Energy and Mines since 2016. In his career, he's held key files in renewable energy and emerging technologies, as well as business development, community relations, and intergovernmental affairs. Brett is the Vice President, Nuclear and Chief Nuclear Officer at New Brunswick Power's Point Lepreau Nuclear Generating Station since 2015, where he leads the strategic direction of the station and has pursued the application of small modular reactors for New Brunswick. He's played an active role in developing the SMR roadmap for Canada. Brett, I will pass the virtual mic over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Candice. Appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for giving us the time to talk a little bit about New Brunswick Power, and small modular reactors. So why nuclear? Why are we advocating for nuclear? A lot of people don't understand nuclear is non-emitting, extremely low carbon. It will support the electrification of the future. We have to retire older plants in New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada, and this will help resolve some of the greenhouse gas net zero by 2050. And the reactors we're going to talk about today in New Brunswick are really associated with Stream 2, which I'll talk to in a minute, but it's the advanced reactors. These are not your grandmother's reactors. These are advanced reactors. They integrate with renewables. They're not necessarily base load units. They can swing with when the wind blows and the sun shines. They integrate with renewables very well. Plus, nuclear is basically, it's hazard resistant. So when we have ice storms, polar vortexes, other weather phenomena, nuclear is typically there supplying the load. So it's a very good option. In New Brunswick, the Point Pro generating station typically supplies anywhere from 40 to 70% of the load, typically 60% of the load in New Brunswick. And New Brunswick is approximately 80% non-emitting last year predominantly because of nuclear. So this is just a graph. It shows nuclear, and most people would say, well, how could that be? Well, we are non-emitting. We build the structure. The plant lasts for 60 years. So when you look at the whole generation of fuel, the fuel cycle, constructing the facility, it's non-emitting. And you look at the whole life of the plant, nuclear is a very low carbon option. So a little bit about the Pan-Canadian approach, and I'm not sure how much of this was done on the first go-around, but I'll speak to it briefly. We do have a Pan-Canadian approach, and this is a tremendous effort coordinated through the CEOs, the utilities in Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and Ontario, with NRCan and the Canadian Nuclear Association, and the SMR Action Plan and the roadmap. So they're all interconnected, they're all interwoven. But we decided, so that we're not competing against each other, that we would develop these three streams. So stream one is a bridging strategy, and it's to produce on-grid generation, first unit at Darlington, potentially a couple of more units at Saskatchewan, to produce power by 2028. New Brunswick took the lead on on-grid advanced small modular reactors. We're looking at generation between 2030 and 2035. But these truly are advanced reactors. You may say, okay, so what is it? What do you mean by advanced reactors? Because sometimes it's confused. Some people look at light water reactors with a passive cooling system, they call it advanced. But I'll get to advanced nuclear in a minute. It truly is, these are advanced reactors. And they predominantly take care of the two largest concerns the public has associated with catastrophic failure of nuclear and also helping to close the used fuel cycle generated by nuclear. Okay, and then there's stream three, which is very small reactors. And it can be anywhere from 1 to 2 megawatts, remote communities, to 10 to 30 megawatts associated with potentially mining use. So you can see there's different markets, different small modular reactors, different advancements in technology. But New Brunswick has the lead in stream two. So again, advanced reactors. It's clean energy. It's a necessary part of the climate change. We've heard our Minister of Energy federally, Seamus O'Regan, come out and say we're not going to get to 2050 without nuclear. We're not going to get there. You've heard Bill Gates come out and recently say without nuclear, you're not going to get there. You're only going to get to about 80%. So nuclear has to be part of the solution. It's inherently safe. So these advanced reactors are very simplistic, depressurized pool reactors. The two that we selected in New Brunswick, one was Moltex, which is a salt reactor, stable salt reactor, and the other one is ARC, clean energy, which is a 100 megawatt sodium reactor. So these are very advanced reactors, but because the salt and the sodium, the way they built the reactor itself, it's inherently safe. So it wants to shut itself down, and it's passively cooled. And in fact, ARC has actually proved this because it's based on EBR-2, which ran in the United States for 30 years. It was a research reactor, 20 megawatts, which is the legacy of the ARC reactor. And we're taking that 20 megawatts and we're scaling it to 100 megawatts. So it has been proven to be inherently safe. And we're looking for the same characteristics that are inherent safety in the reactor built into the Moltex unit. They're simplistic. As I mentioned, they're depressurized pool reactors. They're not going to require a large, significantly built containment. They do not require extra generators, makeup water, all the defense in depth that we do now for the reactors that we presently run, which we run safely, but we run it through a concept of defense in depth. we layer on the levels of protection. These reactors, again, are very simplistic. Depressurized pool reactors, less equipment, less cost. Both reactors that we selected in New Brunswick, ARC Clean Energy and Moltex Canada, have the capability of recycling their own fuel. And in fact, Moltex has the capability of converting CANDU fuel. That's what they're going to use actually for the fuel. Now, ARC also has that capability, and again, it was proven in the past, but what it's going to come down to is what's the most cost effective. But both reactors significantly help decrease the volume and toxicity of the used fuel. They support renewables, as I mentioned before. So how do they do that? These are both fast reactors and not thermal reactors. I'm not going to get into the core, how each isotope works and so forth. But because they're fast reactors, they don't have the fission product poisons that the thermal reactors have. That's why we like to maintain those base loaded. But these reactors truly can swing with power. They can swing with power either through design or, in the case of one vendor, Moltex, they have a tertiary loop which actually stores energy in a solar salt type system. And the reason it can do that is because both these reactors, because it's sodium and salt, run at a very high temperature. Approximately, one's below, one's above, 600 degrees C. So they produce a very, very high temperature, clean steam that can be integrated with renewables, and they can swing power, so when the sun's shining, the wind's blowing, they can back off. They can be used for generating hydrogen, potentially, when they're not used for the grid. And I foresee in the future, when we talk about nuclear, we talk about renewables, we talk about hydrogen, distributed generation, we need to start talking more from an integrated resource plan. It's not just nuclear. It's not just renewables. It's not just hydrogen. It's not just digitalization. We have to talk about what is the integrated plan. And I think as we go forward and we talk about an ARC unit or a Moltex unit or some kind of nuclear power plant, it's going to be in combination with this renewable, or it's going to generate hydrogen in the off-peak hours. So we talked about the high-temperature steam, the supply chain. We've done tremendous supply chain studies here in New Brunswick, Atlantic Canada. We can, because they're simplistic, we can generate 50 to 60% of the parts here in New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada, and the rest through Canada. So a great economic opportunity for New Brunswick, and it's going to benefit not only New Brunswick, Atlantic Canada, and Canada. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bill Breckenridge, and Candace has already introduced him, so you have it, Bill.
Thank you, Brett. Always great to participate in a panel to talk about one of my favorite subjects, SMRs. Thanks to Candace as well for the opportunity. It's been a great collaboration and working with you. And we think that we have something really exciting here, and we're quite proud and pleased to talk about it. Brett talked about some of the topics on my first slide. He did mention about how that we are over 80% right now, and we have an operating nuclear plant in the province right now, which has been extremely successful. And we are pleased and fortunate to have public support for nuclear energy in this province. We've conducted multiple surveys, and one of the most interesting things that comes up is that support for nuclear energy increases the closer the person who responds to the response is, the closer they live to the plant. In other words, the community around it understands it, knows it, and appreciates it. And so when the opportunity for SMRs came up, we jumped at it. We saw that we're in a good position. And in June 2018, the provincial government committed $10 million. And I know in an economy the size of Alberta, that probably doesn't sound like a whole lot of money, but for comparison, our entire population of the province is about the size of Calgary. So $10 million from our budget to support this was a significant investment. And that was quickly matched by the two companies that Brett referred to, ARC and Moltex. And we saw immediately that we were sharing this vision of seizing the opportunity to take this industry, this new opportunity, and take it to the next level. Since then, we've been using this money to leverage more money and more investment and opportunities. At the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton, we have a Center for Nuclear Energy Research. It's been there for years. We partnered with them immediately, and they were able to leverage another $1 million from outside investment for their center. This has resulted in the hiring of another professor in the faculty that will lead graduate students in some of this advanced research. Really exciting stuff. We've seen an increase in student enrollment in the programs. They see the opportunity. They see the world moving to this low carbon electricity future, and that the opportunity that nuclear and in particular SMRs are out there from a career point of view. A lot of the students going in have a strong belief in climate change, and they recognize the fact, as Brett alluded to, that nuclear is going to play a very important role in helping us address our global challenges of climate change. Supply chain, that's critical. We look at it as not only an electricity file. This is a business development file for the province. We have some manufacturing in the province that really does see the opportunity to participate in the build of the new unit that we hope to do in early 2030. The new units, as Brett alluded to, and hopefully and eventually build plans for export. We worked on an economic feasibility study, which with a professor from the University of Moncton, who was really helpful in identifying the huge potential. The numbers are significant, well over 700 full-time equivalents averaged out over the next 20 to 30 years, $1 billion of direct investment. The opportunities that we see are truly enormous. We've been partnering with other entities, and NB Power has been really successful in building on their existing relationships with entities such as the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. An excellent opportunity to strengthen those relationships as we move forward, looking at developing the designs and going through the vendor design review process and the associated approval process with the federal government. We've also been successful with a local entity here to create some public support and industry support. It's called the Atlantic Clean Energy Alliance. And this group really sort of speaks to what Brett was talking to about how nuclear is not an island to itself. It's part of the solution to get us to the low carbon future that we're planning for. It's going to support renewable energies. It's not one or the other, as Brett alluded to. And it reminds me of a statement that President Obama used to say when he said, "When it came to energy, I'm all of the above." And that's the way we look at that. This is part of renewables, demand side management, energy efficiency, and as associate resources to help us get where we need to go. Moving on. Yeah, just finally, I'll just wrap up with a little bit of the political background. We're fortunate that this initiative has spanned both sides of the political aisle. If I could say, it was started by a liberal preceding liberal government. It's been fully supported by our new provincial government, which is a conservative government. Brett also alluded to the great collaboration we've had across the country with our friends in Saskatchewan and our colleagues in Ontario. I've been around the energy file for a while now in Canada, and I can't remember a file recently where we have Western Canada, Central Canada, Atlantic Canada, and the federal government all aligned going in the same direction. To work for the net zero target by 2050, in which nuclear is going to play a real role, and SMRs in particular. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to some questions.
Thanks, Bill. So we'll wrap this up. A couple more slides. How can SMRs, small modular reactors, support Canada? Basically it's clean energy. And the point we want to make here in this slide is sometimes people think of small modular reactors or nuclear reactors as generating only electricity. We need to think differently. These new reactors, these advanced reactors, generate heat. And it can be used for electrification, it can be used for transportation, for electricity, or hydrogen generation. It can be used in all different ways, including even heat to homes, residential, commercial, so forth. So there's all kinds of opportunity based on these different size reactors and their different capabilities. So Bill mentioned, there's opportunity here for partnerships, and we've been working and collaborating even outside of Canada, including the UK, Wales, Romania. Everyone in the Western world is interested in these small modular reactors, and I do think there's an opportunity to make sure that we continue to collaborate and reach out for partnerships to make this happen. And that includes in New Brunswick, even on some of our conferences here we have in New Brunswick, even folks that support the renewable energy market have been included together with us to talk about how renewables integrate with nuclear. The peaking systems I talked about, these reactors, advanced reactors will swing, will move accordingly. Hydrogen generation, tremendous opportunity for hydrogen generation, especially with these high temperature advanced reactors. Oil production. So there's an opportunity here. We can provide electricity and or high temperature heat for the oil production on the oil sands. And we'd be glad to talk to anybody about that. We talked about electrification, remote heating, cogeneration, and desalinization. So we thank you very much for allowing us to present what we're doing here in New Brunswick. And we're more than willing to answer any questions, but we really do appreciate the time, and thank you, Candace, for setting this up.
Thank you so much, Brett and Bill. Our next speakers are Gina Strati from the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories and John Root from the Sylvia Fedoruk Canadian Centre for Nuclear Innovation. Gina is the acting head of the Advanced Reactor Directorate at Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, leading the research program that supports the development and deployment of SMRs and advanced reactors in areas of technology development, fuels, materials, physics, and safety. Gina has been part of CNL's Science and Technology Organization for 19 years, focusing on developing clean energy technologies to meet Canada's GHG emissions targets. Gina's also been heavily involved in developing and executing R&D in support of CANDU reactor sustainability. So I know those who are asking some of our deep technical questions are going to love to hear from Gina. After Gina, we've got John Root, who's had a career that has brought him from the Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, where he helped to develop a method to map stresses inside materials using a beam of neutrons from the NRU reactor at Chalk River Laboratories to the National Research Council of Canada as director of the Canadian Neutron Beam Centre. In 2011, Dr. Root established the Sylvia Fedoruk Centre for Nuclear Innovation, a not-for-profit corporation with the purpose of placing Saskatchewan among global leaders of nuclear research, development, and training through investment in partnerships with universities and industries for maximum societal and economic benefit. So innovation is our topic for our next two speakers, and Gina, I will pass the mic over to you.
Thank you, Candace. And thank you so much for including me as part of your day today, your conference today. It's an honor to be here and talk a little bit about Chalk River Laboratories and CNL. So hopefully you can see my first slide. So again, I'm Gina Strati with Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. I'm not sure if the audience is familiar with CNL, so I thought I'd just spend a moment or two on the lab itself. So Canadian Nuclear Laboratories is Canada's national nuclear laboratory. We have quite a few unique laboratory facilities and a really big team that does a diverse set of activities around nuclear. The research facility is located at the Chalk River Laboratories, and that's about a 2-hour drive outside of Ottawa on the Ottawa River. So very beautiful, particularly at this time of year. I can see the snow falling just outside my window right now, and it's a great part of the country to be in. We also have a small research lab in New Brunswick, and that's our cybersecurity laboratory. So they are set up in Fredericton, New Brunswick. We have 3 sort of main missions at CNL. The first is to restore and protect the environment in different provinces of the country. The second is improving the health of Canadians, looking at medical isotopes, cancer treatments, and other diagnostic testing that we're developing. And the third is clean energy for today and tomorrow, and that's really around our clean energy technology. So the support for the CANDU reactor fleet that's currently in Canada and in several countries around the world, looking at innovative technologies like hydrogen, and of course, small nuclear reactors and advanced reactors, which is the topic of the rest of my talk today. So I think that you've had some previous presentations on exactly what small modular reactors are, so I won't go through this again. I'll just, this slide kind of captures the main characteristics of the size that you're looking at in the reactors, the fact that they're modular, which means that you can construct them in a factory and then move those pieces to where they want to construct the reactor, and of course they're nuclear reactors. What's really interesting about SMRs, I think, is just sort of that inherent innovation. So small modular reactors really provided the nuclear industry and others with a way to think about nuclear reactors differently. So I'm going to pull on a bit of a thread that Brett mentioned in his talk. The conventional reactors have been all about large-scale, clean, stable energy production, on-grid energy production. In Canada, some of the CANDUs have produced hydrogen or been used a little bit more flexibly, but really their main goal has been to produce electricity. With small reactors, you can really start to think about things differently, particularly microreactors, which are down near the 1 to 10 megawatt range. They're really all about flexibility, about taking advantage not only of electricity generation, but also the heat that's produced, and being able to use them as part of like a holistic energy system. So small microreactors working in conjunction with maybe renewables, generating hydrogen, maybe running a greenhouse. This is all a way to view sort of your energy demands a little bit differently and building that unique ecosystem that's right for you, for your community, for your town, and really being able to think about nuclear a little bit differently. So the small reactors are really infused with a lot of innovation. They are engineered differently than conventional reactors. They have a lot of intrinsic safety. They are much smaller. They have longer refueling cycles. So all of this innovation has been engineered into these technologies and makes them a really exciting new, I think, technology that's entering sort of the green energy landscape. Everything about small reactors, even down to how they're funded now. I know one reactor vendor was looking at, I'm going to call it a GoFundMe page, but I think that's probably a little simplistic, but really just different ways to fund the projects, different ways to approach how these projects happen, conversations with the regulator and others around, what are the differences between these reactors and how, are some of the different features that are engineered into them create differences in the way that they're operated, in the way that we can really think about them. So everything about them, it's very exciting to be a researcher these days because everything about them really makes you excited about the technology. And excitement, in my opinion, always drives innovation. So at CNL, we do have a very focused SMR strategic initiative. It has three main components that I wanted to share with you today. The first is an invitation to site a demonstration SMR at a CNL managed site. So we put this invitation process together in 2018. It's a four-step invitation where we just ask people, if you're interested in demonstrating your technology, submit a proposal to us. We'll take a look at it. We have a very elaborate evaluation criteria, a team that looks at these proposals, and maybe we can host your project on our site. So there is one vendor, Global First Power, that has made it to stage 3. We're currently working with them on a site that might be suitable for their technology, and it's the first SMR project that's sort of live in Canada. So we're very excited to have that happening at the Chalk River Laboratories. Another part of our strategic initiative is what we are calling an SMR hub, and that's really building capability. So making sure that we have the skill set, the test rigs, the knowledge, everything that's necessary to support deployment of technology in Canada around these new SMR technologies. So we're very familiar with nuclear. We have a lot of expertise in CANDU technology, but some of these advanced reactors are quite different, and we really want to be ready so that we can help deploy this technology in the country. So we have a lot of our R&D activities. We have collaborations. I think you heard we have an MOU with Brunswick. We have collaborations with universities and other research facilities around the world to try to get the best research and the best results that we can by collaborating. Research can be very expensive, and I think collaborating is a great way to get the most for your money in terms of answering some technical questions. And the third piece of our initiative is what we call enabling projects. So we have Canadian Nuclear Research Initiative, and that's a cost-shared program where, again, we ask vendors, SMR vendors, to suggest some research that they want to do, and then we cost-share that research with them. So that's a way to help keep that research going. And our Clean Energy Development and Innovation Research Park, which is a clean energy park centered around a small reactor, where we want to demonstrate that a small reactor really can work in conjunction with renewables, maybe resource extraction, desalination, maybe a greenhouse, whatever sort of applications people want to see. So we're very excited about this part of this initiative. In our research, we've focused on advanced research in these sort of 5 areas. So when you think about putting a new technology out into the market, especially new nuclear technology, it's all about de-risking the development and the deployment. So we focused our research around technology development, support for the regulator, deployment. So what does it look like to have these deployed? How will they operate? And what about the environment and waste impacts, and what research do we need to do there? Some of these fuels are a little different than we're used to in Canada, so we really want to ask ourselves, like, what does that mean when those fuels enter sort of our fuel cycle in Canada? So the technology development is really interesting. A lot of these technologies are built on maybe technologies that were developed in the 1960s, but they have been re-engineered a little bit. And there are still some gaps, maybe, in the data that we have around these reactors. So that's one thing that we're looking to sort of fill those gaps and answer some of the questions that maybe the regulator has, or others who are in developing policies might have around this new technology. So what I'm going to do for the rest of my talk is just show you a couple of examples of some of the research that we've done that falls into these sort of 5 categories. And the first one is around challenges of advanced reactors. So this graph is a really interesting graph to me. You might see in the bottom left, there's a really dark green square with an arrow pointing to it. And that's the regime that the current generation of nuclear reactors fits into. So it's kind of in between the 200 and 300 degrees. The other blocks on this graph really represent different types of technologies. So in the far right, you'll see there's fusion reactors, which cover a wide range of temperatures. Right above the dark green square, there's something that says VHTR. That's a very high temperature reactor, and that's in sort of 1,000 degrees. These are all temperature regimes for which we don't have a lot of data around what happens to the materials. And so really part of what we're doing at Chalk River Labs is looking to fill some of those gaps and get information around the integrity of some of the materials that would be selected for reactors in some of those regions where maybe the data is a little bit sparse. And this helps us to validate some of our mathematical models and just gives us a better comfort level and understanding about the materials that make up the reactors. We've talked a little bit about flexible nuclear and opportunities for nuclear cogeneration and a hybrid energy system. And I've listed here some of the things that people really hope to get out of these small or micro reactors. And really understanding how these will play together is very, very important. So what we've developed, in addition to our Clean Energy Research Park, which we hope will demonstrate these, we've also developed this model called Hybrid Energy System Optimization Model. And this model allows us to really put in different inputs around different types of energy storage, and really optimize those collection of components into the right sort of energy system for you. So what we can see this model being used by a community or a small town, maybe this community already has some solar panels or some other sort of energy system. You'd be able to put that those existing components into this model, and then add some nuclear and have a better idea of, what would the cost of that be? Maybe you want to optimize it to lower your greenhouse gas emissions. There are different ways to play around with this model, but at the end, it's just a tool that will allow you to get a good idea of the right combination of components for use. So maybe you want to have a lot of energy storage, you want to produce some hydrogen to fuel vehicles or snowmobiles. You'd be able to play around with this model to make better decisions for your particular energy needs in your community. So we're really excited about this model, and our Clean Energy Park will give us some data to help us validate some of the mathematics in here. We've also done some research on materials for off-grid deployment of reactors that are going to be below grade. So a lot of the small reactors, the microreactors, the concept is to put them underground, which is a great idea. But we do have some questions about what does that mean for that particular type of construction, and how can you still monitor the integrity of the materials when they're underground and maybe a little bit harder to do any sort of measurement on those materials. So we've been working on looking at concrete and freeze-thaw effects of structural concrete, looking at maybe embedded sensors and other ways to sort of monitor cracks in the condition of the material so that we can have an idea and have better comfort when these are deployed underground in Canada. We've also been looking at remote sensor networks. There is a concept for SMRs, particularly the microreactors, deployed perhaps in off-grid communities, where you would have several reactors that would be deployed. Those reactors would be operated remotely with very minimal staffing, and maybe the control room would be somewhere else. So the question really is, how do you keep those reactors safe? How do you make sure that you monitor what's going on in those reactors? You can monitor the materials, the way they're operating, and get sort of information about that deployment as quickly as possible. So we've been developing these sensor networks along with our cybersecurity group in New Brunswick, looking at what that could look like as part of a deployment option for small nuclear. So this is a really exciting area. I think the benefits are quite large in having this particular research go forward and making it successful. And I could see this type of sensor network being applied to other areas outside of nuclear as well. That's really all that I have for you today, just a little sampling of the type of research that we have at Chalk River Laboratories. We really do a wide variety of different things, and I think that just gives you a little bit of a sampling of how we're doing our part to help deploy this exciting new technology. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gina. Tons of questions coming in, so we will get to as many as we can at the end. Maybe, Gina, you can answer a couple now while we're in the rest of the session. And John, I'm going to pass it over to you from the Fedoric Center for Nuclear Innovation.
Thanks, Candace. Thanks for inviting the Fedoric Center to be part of this event. We're very honored and privileged to be here. I'm going to focus on an experiment, I guess, in Saskatchewan. About 10 years ago, there was a provincial review that looked at what can we do in this province beyond mining uranium. So mining of uranium in Saskatchewan is a very big deal. We provide about a quarter to a third of the world's uranium here, but that has been mainly the way that Saskatchewan has participated in the nuclear sector by mining and shipping out uranium. But the province said, we should be able to do a lot more with our nuclear sector than just provide resources. And what might that look like? And how might we get people in Saskatchewan engaged in more nuclear innovation? So the Fedoric Center is kind of an experiment, an investment by the province to create new capacities for people in Saskatchewan to participate in nuclear research, development, and training. That's what the Fedoric Center is all about. In this talk, I'm going to focus on the lens of what we do in building a capacity for respectful, objective discussions about nuclear science and technology, so that if we do have to think about something like SMRs, The discussion is a true discussion by people who can see and weigh the pros and cons and engage in discussions to support informed decision making. So the Fedoric Center was set up as a not-for-profit corporation. We have an independent board of directors, and we have one member, which is the University of Saskatchewan. But the way we're funded and operated is through a contract with the province, a funding agreement with Innovation Saskatchewan, and revenues from third parties. As Candace said when she was introducing me, our corporate purpose is to place Saskatchewan among global leaders of nuclear research, development, and training by investing in partnerships with academia and industry. So our key activities, we have 4 business lines, if you like, for realizing the vision of what the Fedoric Center is trying to do. We do invest in programmatic partnerships with Saskatchewan universities. And the idea here is to establish faculty members who do nuclear things. Almost anything nuclear is good because it creates this background in the community of people doing nuclear things and talking about them, no matter what it is. So 2 of the programs that we are coming to a conclusion at this time. The first was to attract a cluster of scientists who would be able to use nuclear imaging methods to advance medical diagnostics and medical therapy with nuclear methods. And that's been very successful and is centered around an investment in a cyclotron facility that was also a part of starting up the Fedoric Center. We also have a program that's about policy and public engagement with nuclear science and technology. It's a social science. How do you do it? How do you interact with communities, ordinary people, Indigenous communities, remote communities? How do you do this engagement and conversation in a way that fosters respectful discussion as opposed to polarized argument, basically, which has been one of the Achilles heels of the nuclear sector for a long time. Probably it has been unwise to tackle that by saying, well, you know what, you guys are kind of dumb. If we give you more information, you will certainly come around to our point of view that nuclear is good. And that's just amplifying the polarization. So, but how do you do better? And that's what this research is about. The second thing we do is we fund research projects. So scientists in Saskatchewan would like to do something nuclear. They respond to a call for proposals issued by the Fedoric Center, and they make these proposals for things they'd like to do, and we rank them and fund them. And that gets scientists from different subjects diverting their interests or applying their knowledge and skills to something nuclear. And it could be radiochemistry, it could be materials science, could be social science, could be something in energy. And we've given out about a little over $6 million since we started in 38 projects, which has enabled this research to go on. The professor does the research, delivers an outcome, hires students or postdocs, and gets young people involved in nuclear things. So that's what that activity is all about. The third thing we do is we operate a cyclotron center. It's a pretty substantial nuclear instrument at its core, and it's surrounded by labs that are Health Canada compliant. So we can do 2 things. We can support innovation of researchers who want to advance nuclear imaging methods, radiochemistry, radiopharmaceuticals, imaging in live animals, imaging in plants even. So we have all of that capability in one facility to support innovation in nuclear imaging. And it also is a facility that produces a nuclear imaging agent called FDG that we deliver to a local hospital, regional hospitals actually, to enable doctors to diagnose and image cancer. Before the Fedoruk Center was here in Saskatchewan, patients had to go out of province to get PET CT scanning done. But now that we're here, we're able to supply PET CT capability right close to home. So that's been a real game changer for cancer diagnosis and treatment here. The fourth thing we do is we're available to the government or the public to give consultations about nuclear topics. We might not know everything, but we can undertake a project that and acquire resources to get answers and help people to understand and make decisions wisely about nuclear science and technology. So I'll just give you a few examples of things we've been doing that are on the social and social engagement side of nuclear science. So this is an example of a programmatic investment. It's with the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School for Public Policy, and it is comprised of 3 projects that you can see here in bullets. So there's one about aspects of major science facilities, of which a neutron source would be a good example of the future. But how do we handle these major science facilities nationally in a cohesive, orderly way? And how do these facilities deliver value by bringing scientists together from different disciplines to use the common resource? So that's a project that has a nuclear aspect to it. And then we have 2 projects that are very focused actually on the SMR zone. One is, how do you change people's minds about future energy choices? What kind of conversation and what kind of process would you do to enable people to be more open-minded and revisit maybe points of view they used to have? And that's being led by Margot Hurlbert at the University of Regina. And the second one is focusing on how do you have the conversation about placing an SMR in a northern community, and that's led by Jeremy Leaner at University of Saskatchewan. Here's an example of a project funded by the Fedoruk Center. Projects they're time-bound and they have deliverables. They have a project leader. And what this was quite a brilliant project led by Professor Issam Hussain at the University of Regina. And what he did was he gathered colleagues from different disciplines surrounding the question of SMRs. And the idea is, if you were going to place an SMR in Saskatchewan, it needs to have inputs from different perspectives. And the examples of perspectives, he gathered professors who would be able to talk about the environment, treaties, geography, geology. Is it safe? Is there an earthquake zone? That kind of thing. Water resources. It's pretty dry and flat in Saskatchewan, so you do have to think about things like that. The electrical grid, communication networks. So there are academic aspects in all of these topics. And the idea of the project is to get people to direct their attention to apply their discipline to the subject of placing an SMR somewhere in Saskatchewan. Another thing we do is we organize events. We have a peer-to-peer project reporting cycle. Those projects, the project leaders get together, they present progress in front of each other, and a general audience is invited. We have a project advisory committee that asks questions. So it creates a venue for discussion about the value of the research that's being done and the impacts that we might be able to see it having. We also have a public-oriented discussion practice called Nuclear Insights. And we've had 2 of these events so far, one in Saskatoon, one in Regina, more to come. And the idea is to enable ordinary people to listen or ask questions of some experts on a theme for the night. That's been kind of an interesting social experiment, just to do that. The social science research automatically means you're engaging with people. This is Margot Hurlbert's project, where she's already engaged over 200 people from 13 communities, talking about nuclear and other energy options to see how the opening of the minds can be enabled. We've even been on TV or the radio. So there were 2 events over the past couple of years. The province of Saskatchewan announced its intention to add a nuclear component to the energy mix in the Saskatchewan growth plan. When that happened, the media was interested to understand, what does that mean? Like, what are we really getting into? So they came to the Fedoric Center as a consultative service to shine some light on that would be accessible to the public. The other event was the signing of an agreement among New Brunswick, Ontario, and Saskatchewan to deploy small modular reactors. That created another flurry of media interest in the province, where we were able to provide some translation from the technicalities to terms that are hopefully accessible to ordinary people. Well, that's just to give you a flavor of the experiment of the Fedoric Center, the investment of the province to try and create a capacity for respectful, objective conversations on nuclear in any area, but can be applied at this time to a conversation about small modular reactors as an option for the future in Saskatchewan. Thanks.
Thank you so much, John. You know, we've had a lot of questions over the past both sessions about public perception and how to have these conversations. So I really appreciate the content you shared today. Our final 2 speakers for you today are Alain de Beer from the Government of Saskatchewan and Eric McGoey from Ontario Power Generation. Alain joined the Government of Saskatchewan in September 2020 to head up the Nuclear Secretariat, which is working to progress the government's intention to develop and deploy small modular reactors in Saskatchewan. Before that, Alain pursued a career in oil and gas, which allowed her to travel around the world while working for Shell International and in Canada, with her last job being at the Alberta Energy Regulator in Calgary. Eric McGoey is the Director, Remote Generation Development at Ontario Power Generation. Born and raised in Thunder Bay, Eric and his family have made Toronto their home since 2002. He loves public policy, basketball, election campaigns, cooking, reading, cycling, and his kids, maybe not in that order. Eric worked in the Ontario government for over a decade as both a civil servant and a senior political advisor, and in the resource sector since 2012, focusing on sustainable resource and community economic development, energy, land use planning, and Indigenous partnerships before joining the new nuclear development team. So Alain and Eric, over to you to tell us a little bit more about how the provinces are collaborating.
Thank you, Candice, and thank you for having us. Good morning. It's my pleasure to share the stage with Eric and to tell you a little bit about how our provinces have been collaborating, as well as how the utilities between the 3 provinces have been collaborating. Next slide, please. So our collaboration, specific to SMRs, of course, started in 2018 when Ontario Power Generation signed an MOU with SaskPower, which is the Saskatchewan utility. And the aim of that MOU was to collaborate on SMR technology and SMR vendor selection. And that was followed in 2019 by the MOU, as John mentioned, that was signed by the premiers of Ontario, New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan to further collaborate on the development of SMRs. Following that, in May 2000, the Cabinet of Saskatchewan gave direction to set up the SMR unit, also known as the Nuclear Secretariat. It was publicly announced in June 2020, and its primary responsibility was to fulfill those MOU commitments, as well as coordinate provincial SMR strategic planning, implementation, and lead industry stakeholder community engagement, including engagement with Indigenous groups. The SMR unit is positioned in the Ministry of Environment because we really clearly want to put the link between SMRs in Saskatchewan with the provincial targets to reduce emissions. Next slide, please. So what did we commit to in the MOU? There were 5 major commitments. I think they will start to come up soon. The first one was to work cooperatively to advance the development and deployment of SMRs to address the needs of New Brunswick, Ontario, and Saskatchewan with regards to addressing climate change, regional energy demand, economic development, for example, supply chain, fuel manufacture, skilled employment, export opportunities, and research and innovation opportunities. I might just try and, yeah, there we go. The second commitment was to work cooperatively as provinces to address key issues for SMR deployment. And some of those key issues are the technological readiness, the regulatory frameworks, economics and financing, nuclear waste management, and last but not least, public and Indigenous engagement. There were 3 more commitments. Oops, sorry, Candace. No, we're both. Right. There were 3 more commitments. Next slide, please. Sorry. The first one was to work cooperatively and influence the federal government in 3 different ways. The first one was to provide an unambiguous statement that nuclear energy is clean technology and is required as part of the climate change solution. The second federal government action that we've influenced is to really work cooperatively to positively influence the support for SMRs, and that has been clearly identified in the Canadian SMR roadmap. And then the third one is to positively influence the federal government to make changes that might be necessary to facilitate the introduction of SMRs. And many of those changes can be found in the SMR action plan that was published in December. Our fourth commitment was to work cooperatively to inform the public and about economic and environmental benefits of nuclear energy and SMRs. And then the last one was to work cooperatively with other interested provinces and territories to explore the potential for SMR deployment in their jurisdictions. Next slide, please. Thanks. So just to give you some examples of where we have been collaborating, I've sort of split the examples in 2. And one is the collaboration between Sask Power and Ontario Power Generation. Not only are Sask Power and Ontario Power Generation working on selecting the vendor and the technology for our SMR, but they're also planning to work together on the licensing work. Ontario Power Generation is a well-experienced nuclear licensee, and so Saskatchewan can learn a lot of OPG as we work through that process. Ontario Power Generation and Sask Power are also discussing how to collaborate on pre-engagement activities. There will be lots to learn for OPG on how we engage in Saskatchewan and how that engagement about SMRs will progress. And then, of course, OPG will be taking the first-of-a-kind risk, building the first SMR on the site in Ontario and taking on those project management risks of building the first SMR. But on the other hand, the fleet deployment that will be following that first-of-a-kind SMR deployment is very important for OPG, and that fleet deployment will happen in Saskatchewan. From a provincial point of view, we've been collaborating on many other areas, and I've added Alberta in that list of provinces because we've been very glad to have Alberta around the table as we progress, discussing all the various areas where we can work. For example, supply chain. You heard it from New Brunswick. They have been building up a supply chain, and we have been learning lots from New Brunswick about their recent lessons learned, as well as all the historical lessons learned from Ontario. Also, of course, Ontario and New Brunswick's existing supply chain will provide certainty for SMR vendors when they enter the market in Canada. There is, of course, a well-established regulatory regime and framework for large nuclear reactors in Ontario and New Brunswick, but SMRs, of course, are somewhat different. And so there will be instances where Saskatchewan may be breaking new ground, being a first licensee of an SMR on a new site, learning lots about what we've done with large nuclear reactors and where the differences are for SMRs. All three provinces, New Brunswick, Ontario, and Saskatchewan, as you've heard, have a presence in nuclear research and development. And together with the federal research programs that are happening on the CNL side, for example, there is lots of opportunities to grow and stimulate new research capability associated with SMRs. And then last but not least, of course, climate change and reducing GHG emissions are very different in all our different provinces, but we see SMRs tightly connected with that emission reduction. And as we work together, we're learning a lot of other jurisdictions and how our journey to clean energy and clean electricity generation is progressing, both at a national and an international forum. And I think that's the last example. And just to give you a sense of timing, following the signing of the MOU in 2019, there was a meeting of the three ministers in February 2020, and the utilities since then have written a feasibility study that summarizes economic and technical feasibility. That will be released, we expect, either later this month or early in March. And the provinces are now working on an MOU strategic plan, which really identifies those key strategies and enabling conditions to help us make decisions in all our various provinces. And that plan is expected in the middle of 2021. And I think that's the last of my slides. Thank you very much. Over to Eric.
Thank you, Len. And Eric, I'll pop up your slides and we'll pass the mic to you.
Thank you very much. No pressure being the last speaker after so many experts. So I'll try to breeze through these slides relatively quickly because I've seen a lot of great questions in the chat already, and I know that there will be more. So I'm just trying to give you a quick overview of what OPG is trying to do in the space and how it knits together in that pan-Canadian approach that Brett was talking about earlier. So let's go to the next slide, please, Candace. OPG isn't just a nuclear company. We make about half the electricity in the province of Ontario, and we were able to retire our coal plants over the last 15 years. So now our generation is 90% plus free of carbon emissions. And we're able to do that cost competitively. We're about 40% less expensive than the other generators in the space. We also have a large number of employees, almost 11,000 people who work for the company across the province. Next slide, please. So when I said earlier, not just a nuclear company, although about 60% of our generation does come from nuclear, we have very large stations, most significantly in Darlington, which alone produces about 20% of the electricity in Ontario. Also Pickering, but you'll see we also have 66 hydroelectric generating stations in Ontario. We also have some thermal stations. We have a converted coal station that now burns wood waste from the forest sector up in Atikokan, a solar facility as well. And you'll see recently our footprint expanded into the United States as well. We started buying some small hydro assets there, and that's part of our growth strategy to offset the closure of Pickering, which is going to happen in 2025. Next slide, please. So you heard me talk about our two nuclear stations. We have quite a long history. The Pickering station is coming to near the end of its life, and it's not economical to refurbish it. But at Darlington, there is a very large refurbishment happening, and those two realities are driving a lot of what we're trying to accomplish with our growth strategy around SMRs specifically. Next slide, please. So CANDUs produce an incredible amount of electricity, but they also are complex and require a lot of staff to run. So when Pickering closes, not only are we going to lose 3,000 megawatts, but we're going to shed about 1/3 of our workforce. That's pretty significant when you think about CANDUs requiring about 3,000 people to operate. And really, if you're looking for the through line in nuclear and how we move from CANDUs to SMRs and why, I think it's important to understand that CANDUs are very safe and they produce huge amounts of power. And there's essentially two reasons that we're not looking at building more CANDUs. One is that that's not what the market is looking for. They're looking for smaller plants in that 300 to 400 megawatt range. As coal plants are retiring, really attractive if you could bring in grid scale SMRs to replace that power, but take advantage of the existing transmission infrastructure you have, retrain some of your thermal staff, and minimize the disruptions there. That's a huge part of it. Next slide, please. The other piece really is that over the last 40 years, there have been technological innovations that essentially allow you to simplify your design. And that simplification in the design makes the SMRs potentially less expensive without in any way compromising safety. So the simpler designs are less expensive to manufacture and less expensive to operate. And they are at least as safe as, if not more safe than, the CANDU fleet, which has a enviable safety record in terms of the history in Canada. So that is really why we're looking at building SMRs instead of more CANDUs. But Darlington is still significant for two reasons. One is we're doing a very large refurbishment there that's going to extend the life of the station for about 30 years. And in the process of doing that, it's a $13 billion 10-year project. We're really trying to get that mega project management experience and also demonstrate that nuclear can change the channel around the stories that we grew up with about cost overruns and schedule delays. So I think it's fair to say that if we weren't doing well on the Darlington refurbishment, we've already brought one of the units back into service. Next unit is being refurbished right now of the 4 units. If the government didn't have confidence in our ability to do that project, then I don't think we would have the political capital to be looking at SMRs. And so that kind of sets the stage for where OPG is at. So on to the next slide, please. Really, the challenge is all about climate change. We have increased demand for energy, and we understand that continuing to burn fossil fuels at the rate that we've been doing over the last 60 years longer is not sustainable. And there's no single energy solution. Nuclear has to be part of the mix. Hydro is great if you've got hydroelectric potential in places like Quebec, British Columbia, Newfoundland and Labrador, Manitoba, unlikely to build SMRs or go nuclear because they've got rich hydroelectric resources, and that's fantastic. As you know, OPG has 66 hydroelectric generating stations. We're not against hydro at all. But when you look at the other renewables, solar and wind in particular, they're intermittent. They're not producing power if the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. And that's where SMRs can fill a really important niche in enabling renewables to be deployed because if you're using SMRs along with renewables, you've got that non-emitting, low-carbon solution that you can count on for baseload generation. Next slide, please. So when we say small, that can mean a lot. The IAEA definition is less than 300 megawatts, but of course you can have multiple units of under 300 megawatts that total a larger size, which you would use for grid scale. Brett Plummer talked earlier about the three different streams that we're looking at. And so, in stream 3, you've got very small modular reactors that are meant to be deployed at that, sort of remote mines or communities. Those might be as small as 1 megawatt or say 5 megawatts, like the Global First Power Project, and then all the way up to utility scale. And really, these designs are based on technology that have existed for a long time, just haven't been deployed commercially. If you were looking for something that was most analogous to an SMR, there's two places you'd find it right now. One is research reactors that are owned by and run by post-secondary institutions. McMaster has one, Royal Military College has one, for example. And the other place is nuclear submarines or aircraft carriers. And in both of those places, there's not really a commercial mandate where you have to compete against other technologies. You either want a research reactor or you don't. You either have a quiet nuclear powered submarine or a really noisy diesel one that is much less useful from a military perspective. And so what we're doing here isn't taking new technologies as much as it's finding a new commercial model for existing proven technologies and demonstrating that they can be cost competitive against the alternatives. Next slide, please. So I already talked about some of these in terms of, the enhanced safety features that come from that simplification of the design. But some other things that are pretty interesting is load following capabilities using things like salt loops as a form of thermal storage. So that you don't have to be ramping up and down as much. And I'm getting the hook in the chat, so I'm going to wrap up in 3 minutes, so I'm going to keep breezing through. No problem, Candace. Next slide, please. This map just gives you a sense of, I guess, how advanced the conversations are in different jurisdictions and where we see potential deployment happening. So those solid lines on the right hand of the screen where there are more concrete projects, and then the dotted lines on the left half where we're just having more introductory level conversations about potential use of SMRs. Next slide, please. 3 streams. Brett already touched on this, so I'm not going to spend long on this slide, but really New Brunswick and New Brunswick Power are really leading stream 2. OPG is active on stream 1 in terms of our Darlington project, and on stream 3 with our off-grid project at Chalk River. Next slide, please. So as Gina was talking about, Global First Power has a project at Chalk River to build what's currently Canada's first and only SMR project, and focused on the off-grid market. Next slide, please. We're doing our environmental assessment as we speak, preparing for the next round of public and Indigenous engagement. This is a cross-section of our of the proposed technology. You can see below grade, you've got the reactor unit that is located underground, and then some of the balance of plant and the adjacent plant above ground, some of the support structures. And really, this is aimed at that remote market where it's not economical to bring transmission lines up to, say, a remote mine. The reality is that many of the existing mineral deposits in Canada that are located near existing road or transmission infrastructure are near the end of their economic life. And so some of the most promising deposits we're finding are off the grid, literally, in terms of not being connected by roads or by transmission lines. And SMRs that could be used as an alternative to diesel generation could enable some of those projects, as well as providing alternatives to communities and mines that are currently dependent on diesel. Next slide, please. So when I talked about Darlington earlier, the other piece that I didn't mention in my haste was, in addition to the refurbishment project, we also have a site license for new nuclear generation at Darlington. So the EA has been approved, and the license was approved. It's being renewed this year, or sorry, we are applying to renew it this year. Of course, the CNSC will ultimately make that decision. And that means that there's essentially a head start that you can get by building at Darlington for grid scale versus any other location in Canada. And that's part of the fleet approach, which we're talking about that Alain alluded to with Saskatchewan. So next slide, please. The idea really is, rather than build another only-of-a-kind reactor, you would take advantage of the opportunity to collaborate with jurisdictions like Saskatchewan and choose a technology that doesn't just work for Ontario's needs at Darlington, but also works for Sask Power. So we could build one, essentially de-risk the technology. Then Sask Power could build on that using the exact same technology, and it would allow you to get economies of scale around operations, training, maintenance. You could imagine an outage crew working, Monday to Wednesday at Darlington, then hopping on a plane and working on a reactor in Saskatchewan on Thursday and Friday, where the panels are in the same place, the wires go to the same spot, it's all the same systems, it's very familiar. It's more, analogous to working on one 98 Camry and then another 98 Camry, rather than having to go break out the book because it's an unfamiliar model. Next slide, please. My last slide. I'm trying to end on time for you, Candace. So why are we doing this? OPG, at the end of the day, is the largest nuclear operator in Canada. We've been doing this for 50 years. We've got a climate change plan that aims to have the company be net zero by 2040 and enable net zero jurisdictions by 2050, as we assist with electrification and other sort of climate change focused initiatives. We want to keep being a nuclear company, and we want to put our expertise to work for the rest of the country. We essentially decarbonize our electricity system by closing coal and relying heavily on nuclear as a result. We want to bring that experience to other jurisdictions like Saskatchewan and help them accomplish the same thing. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Not only is it difficult following many presentations, but when your host is squishing you on the back end to finish up, I appreciate you moving quickly through that. We've got about 15 minutes left for questions, and we've had so many questions coming in. I know the presenters in the background have been typing furiously some of the answers where they can get back to folks. But I wanted to kick us off with a really interesting question. Just following up on this idea about collaboration and how the provinces are really working together to understand the opportunities, but also the challenges around nuclear technologies. There's a question from Todd here about interprovincial opportunities to expand the uranium value chain. Can we expand milling, refining, enriching capacity? Does Alberta potentially have a role to play? How can we have better synergies with Saskatchewan? So I'd love to maybe pass this over to Alain to start, if you don't mind taking a bit of a time to answer this, and then anyone else, just give me a wave if you'd like to speak.
Thanks, Candace. And yeah, great question, and definitely something that's very much so on our radar, especially as the three provinces are writing the strategic plan, and hopefully Alberta will be signing on to the MOU soon. There is, of course, already an integrated supply chain. The uranium that is mined in Saskatchewan is currently refined in Ontario, so we are already looking at a supply chain, but there are many more options available as we move into the SMR world. One thing that will be really important to keep an eye on is the type of technology and vendor that Ontario Power Generation and Sask Power will pick, because right now we are looking at three very different designs, and each of those designs use a different type of fuel. And so dependent on the design that the companies will pick, we'll be looking at a vast range of opportunities for Canada to play a role in not only the refining, but possibly the enrichment of uranium and the fabrication of fuel. So strategically, we're definitely there, but the actual tangible actions, we really need to look at the vendor and the technology selection.
Thanks, Elaine. Did anyone else want to jump in here? Thoughts around interprovincial coordination or collaboration on the value chain? Brett, I see your hand waving.
The other thing I'll mention is, as was mentioned, there's several different technologies, several different fuels, but there is a working group through the CANDU Owners Group. NRCan, Natural Resource Canada, is involved. Even the Nuclear Energy Institute in the United States is involved to try to understand where some of these fuel sources will come from. And also how they'll be refined and or enriched and how they'll be manufactured. So there's already an effort, a pan-Canadian effort to understand whether it be metallic fuel, oxide fuel, whether it's not enriched or enriched, to what enrichment value. There is also a significant Canadian effort to understand how we're going to accomplish this for small modular reactors.
Thanks, Brett. We've got a lot of folks curious about fuel recycling. And I know a few of the presenters today chatted a little bit about different technology approaches and recycling fuel either within the reactors themselves or recycling CANDU fuel. Can a couple of you jump in on some of those technology options and what you're seeing out there and what the potential is? Elaine, I think I saw your hand go up. Oh, no, she's saying no.
No, I think that's more a New Brunswick question.
A New Brunswick.
Sorry.
Bill, why don't I put you on the spot?
Well, I would actually defer to Brett on this one. It's more of a technical opportunity. It is something that's very significant. We already have our own stored fuel here from having operated La Pro for close to 30 years. These new technologies have the ability to reuse this fuel, which is obviously tremendously advantageous. Right now, the current plan is, to create a national repository stored deep underground, but that would have to be shipped. That has a whole bunch of challenges. So I'll throw it over to Brett of the benefits of recycling it on the site where it was created.
Yeah, appreciate that. So, it's always a complicated question to answer because I can try to answer it from a layman standpoint or a very technical standpoint. So I'm not going to try to insult anybody, but I'll start simple and maybe work my way up. And I think Gina would probably correct me if I get off track. But the thermal reactors we have today burn natural uranium. Natural uranium in the fuel bundles that we have, the CANDU fuel bundles, is only approximately 0.7%, approximately 0.7% uranium-235. That's what is thermally fission. So I use a very simplistic analogy that essentially in these reactors, and we do create additional isotopes, transuranics, and other fuel within that bundle as it's being fissioned. But predominantly, it's like burning the bark off a log. And then we take and we store that log, and it's been, these fuel bundles have been stored safely, very safely, and managed for over 50 years. And this new technology does not replace the need for a deep geological repository. It will reduce the volume of waste because these fast reactors, these advanced reactors, have the capability of burning that log or the majority of that log. And it really depends on whether you're talking a burner, which is a Multex technology, which converts to CANDU fuel, or the ARC, which is a breeder that actually generates fuel, but also has the capability, and it's been proven with EBR2, of burning transuranics, essentially the waste from oxide CANDU fuel as well. And they've done the studies to understand that Multex is a burner, so it'll continuously be refueled with converted CANDU can-do fuel. If we choose ARC in the future, it can recycle its own fuel, and it can also burn use can-do fuel. You need about 7 ARCs to essentially 100 megawatt ARC units to burn all the used fuel at point of pro. So there's opportunity here to reduce the volume, and it also, by burning a lot of those transuranics or fissioning those transuranics, you also decrease the toxicity of what's left. So if I burn that log and I have some of the log left or the ash left, it's not a 300,000 year issue. It's a 300-year issue from a half-life standpoint. So there's tremendous advantages using these advanced fast reactors to reduce this or to help close the fuel cycle. Doesn't completely close it, but it helps close it significantly. I'll leave it at that unless there's another specific question.
Thanks so much, Brett. We've got a couple of questions about siting and geography to think about. And so one of the questions was around, how come so many of these slides are showing things underground? Isn't that more challenging? You know, what's the thinking there? And, you know, sort of related around siting, do SMRs have to be around major water sources for cooling, like rivers or lakes? Are there differences? Can they be put in, you know, these remote locations in the middle of the prairies and that sort of thing? Who could I grab to start us off there? Go for it, Brett.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. So no, they don't necessarily have to be on a lake or an ocean or something like that. They will need some water. You can basically have cooling towers, and it's not the what people think of necessarily a nuclear cooling tower, hyperbolic structure like that. I mean, it can be very just cooling air banks, so to speak, to basically on the secondary side to condense the steam. So you will need some water makeup, but nothing compared to using a heat sink such as an ocean or a lake. So they can be used in remote communities. And as mentioned previously, essentially these much smaller reactors can be almost built anywhere, and they have been in the past, whether it be nuclear submarines or whether it be a research reactor in the middle of a city at a university. But the reason they're built underground predominantly is because you want to make sure they're safe from any external hazards, which include any kind of attack, any aircraft, any missiles. It's much easier to build them underground to protect them and put some kind of structure on top of them to protect them. And that's predominantly why they're built underground. The lessons we've learned in the past, whether it be terrorist attack, whether it be cyber, whether it be fire, whether it be whatever, the advantage of building these reactors is that we can incorporate all that engineering into these new designs and make sure that these plants are very, very safe.
Thanks, Brett. I want to go to one last question, and maybe this might be one for Bill or Alen. A lot of questions today around, okay, well, we've heard from these great jurisdictions doing all these sorts of things. What about Alberta? Like, what can Alberta do? What are the job potential opportunities? And so I wanted to just tease you. Alberta is very different, and we're just starting this conversation in the province. But what went into sort of your strategies around looking at SMRs as a potential opportunity for your energy transition and your future energy mix? What are the things maybe you would just say we should keep top of mind as we start to discuss and explore this?
Okay, maybe I'll go first. You're right. I'm lucky enough to be well aware of Alberta's unique situation. Its electricity market is much different than anywhere else in Canada, as you well know. But I think for Albertans and the Albertan industry and economy, you need to look a little far out, 10 to 20 years, where you want to be. I think Brett made some really good points about how the SMRs have a unique ability to provide a lot of heat sources. So it's really beyond just electricity where it can play a role in the Alberta economy, which I think is really important. From a policy standpoint, I think I'm not familiar with your climate change, your provincial plan for your targets and stuff, but I think to assess the role that SMRs could play in that, it'd be a way to sort of position them as an entity that you guys can pursue going forward.
Thanks, Bill. Any other thoughts folks want to jump in before I close our session today? Okay.
SMRs can also play a role in hydrogen production. And I know that Alberta is looking at a hydrogen roadmap, so that could be something that could be taken into account.
Wonderful. Thanks, Hélène. Well, we've got just 1 minute left here, so I'm going to close our session. We had so many questions coming in while everyone was speaking, and so if we didn't get a chance to answer them today live or in the background via the chat, I'll give our speakers a chance to take a look at them after, and we'll be able to post some answers on the website and send that to you later. This webinar has been recorded and will be available after. Again, we'll be able to send out links to everyone that was registered here today. This was such an exciting panel for me today, to have voices all across the country, talking about the different activities that are going on in this space. I think, nuclear reactors, small modular reactors is such an exciting opportunity for the conversations that we are having and the way we're approaching it. And John, your remarks around the Fedoric Center and how you're helping host those conversations around Canada is really interesting to me. I do want to acknowledge, we're coming together today across the whole country and acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis and Inuit who've lived and cared for these lands for generations. I'm really grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and for those who've gone before us. And making this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation, gratitude, whose territory we reside on or visiting. And when I think about innovation and the opportunity we have to have these conversations as we start to explore these technologies, I think it's a really great opportunity for the country to look at potential opportunity and moving forward in a way that is respectful of everyone here. So thank you so much today. And I hope you'll be able to join us for the third session. We're going to dive deep into tech. We've got 9 companies who are going to showcase their technologies. So register, join us next week on Tuesday, and we will say goodbye for today. Thank you.
Thank you.